Kim Tae had been walking these shiny halls for 3 months now, and he still couldn't get used to how everything sparkled. The walls of the Alterian royal vessel looked like they were made of pure crystal, reflecting his human face back at him from every angle. His black security uniform stood out against all the bright colors around him. Every step he took made a soft echo that reminded him he was the only human on this massive ship. He loved his job, though. Being a security guard for alien royalty wasn't something most humans got to do. The pay was good, the work was steady, and he got to see parts of the galaxy most people from Earth could only dream about. Plus, he was proud of his perfect record. Not a single incident in 3 months. No thefts, no fights, no problems at all. The other guards respected him now, even if they didn't at first. When he started, they would whisper behind his back about how humans were troublemakers. But Tae proved them wrong by doing his job better than anyone expected. He showed up early, stayed late, and never complained about the long shifts. This morning started like any other. He checked the security systems, walked his patrol routes, and made sure all the important areas were safe. The royal vault was his main responsibility, a huge room filled with the most valuable things the Alterian royal family owned: ancient artifacts, rare metals, and most importantly, the sacred energy cores that powered their entire civilization. But something felt different. Today, there was tension in the air. Servants were whispering more than usual, and the other guards looked nervous. Tae tried to ask what was wrong, but nobody would tell him anything. They just gave him strange looks and walked away quickly. Then it happened. Right in the middle of his afternoon patrol, 6 royal guards surrounded him. These weren't the regular security guards he worked with every day. These were the Queen's personal protectors, big, scary aliens with weapons that could turn a human into dust in seconds. Kim Tae, their leader said in a voice like grinding metal. "You're coming with us." They didn't give him a chance to ask questions. They grabbed his arms and marched him through the ship's corridors toward the royal chamber. Other crew members stopped what they were doing to stare. Some looked shocked, others looked angry, and a few even looked sad. Word was spreading fast that the human guard was in serious trouble. The royal chamber was huge and intimidating, with a ceiling so high Tae couldn't see the top. The Queen's throne sat on a platform in the center, surrounded by dozens of the most important people in Alterian society. Nobles, advisors, military officers, and royal family members all stared down at him with suspicious eyes. Queen Lissa was even more terrifying in person than in the official portraits. She was tall, elegant, and beautiful in an alien way, but her eyes burned with anger that made Tae's skin crawl. Her voice could probably shatter glass when she was mad, and right now she was furious. "Human!" she screamed so loud that the whole room seemed to shake. "My sacred energy cores have vanished, and you were the only guard on duty." The accusation hit Tae like a punch to the stomach. The energy cores were missing? That was impossible. He had checked the vault just hours ago, and everything was exactly where it should be. The security systems showed no signs of tampering. How could they be gone? But looking around the room, Tae could see that nobody cared about his confusion. To them, the answer was obvious. The human did it. Humans were thieves and criminals. Everyone knew that. The fact that he had been working honestly for 3 months didn't matter. His perfect record meant nothing. He was human, and that was enough to make him guilty. The crowd of nobles began to whisper among themselves, and Tae could hear every cruel word. They called humans primitive scavengers and backwater criminals. They said his people were known throughout the galaxy for being sneaky and untrustworthy. Some even suggested that hiring a human guard was the stupidest thing the Queen had ever done. But Tae didn't panic. He had been trained for situations like this back on Earth. Stay calm. Think clearly, and don't let emotions control your actions. He looked directly at Queen Lissa, meeting her angry gaze with steady confidence. "Your Majesty," he said in a respectful but firm voice, "I've served with honor for 3 months. I would never betray your trust." Queen Lissa laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was bitter and cold like ice cracking. "Honor?" she repeated mockingly. "Your kind knows only theft and deception. You probably planned this from the day you arrived." Chief Advisor Nex moved forward like a snake slithering toward its prey. He was one of those aliens that made humans uncomfortable just by looking at them. His skin was covered in dark green scales that shifted and moved when he walked, and his yellow eyes never seemed to blink. When he smiled, which he was doing now, rows of sharp teeth showed behind his thin lips. "Your Majesty," Nex said in a voice that sounded like oil being poured over gravel. The evidence couldn't be more obvious. This human had everything he needed to commit this crime. He began counting on his clawed fingers, making sure everyone in the room could see his points. First, he had access. As a security guard, he knew exactly how to get into the vault without triggering any alarms. Second, he had opportunity. He was the only guard on duty when the cause disappeared. And third, he had motive. Nex paused dramatically, letting his words sink in. The nobles around the room nodded their heads in agreement. To them, this all made perfect sense. His people are known across the galaxy for their... Nex pretended to search for the right word, but everyone knew he had already chosen it carefully. Resourcefulness. Humans will steal anything they can get their hands on if they think it will make them rich. The crowd murmured their agreement. Stories about human criminals were popular entertainment in this part of the galaxy. Movies, books, and news reports all painted humans as clever thieves who couldn't be trusted. The fact that most of these stories were exaggerated or completely made up didn't matter. People believed what they wanted to believe. Tai listened to all of this without saying a word. He had heard these kinds of accusations before, not just about himself but about his entire species. It hurt, but he had learned long ago that getting angry would only make things worse. Instead, he watched the faces around him, studying their expressions and body language. That was something humans were good at, reading people and understanding what they were really thinking. Queen Lissa stood up from her throne, and the entire room fell silent. When she spoke, her voice was cold and final, like a door slamming shut. "Kim Tay of Earth," she announced, "you are sentenced to immediate execution for theft of royal property." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Even though everyone had expected this outcome, hearing it said out loud made it real. Some of the nobles looked satisfied, others looked uncomfortable, and a few even looked sad. But none of them spoke up to defend him. The royal guards began moving toward Tay, their weapons already charged and ready. These weren't the kind of aliens who enjoyed killing, but they would follow orders without question. In their minds, they were about to execute a dangerous criminal who had betrayed their queen's trust. But something strange happened as they got closer. Instead of looking scared or desperate like most condemned prisoners, Tay did something unexpected. He smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small curve at the corner of his mouth. But it was enough to make several of the courtiers take a step backward. There was something in that smile that made them nervous. It wasn't the smile of a defeated man. It was the smile of someone who knew something they didn't. "Before you execute an innocent man," Tay said quietly, his voice carrying easily through the silent room, "perhaps you'd like to know who actually stole your precious cores." The words stopped everyone in their tracks. The guards froze mid-step, their weapons still raised but no longer moving forward. The nobles looked at each other with confusion and surprise. Even Chief Advisor Nex seemed caught off guard. "Queen." Lissa raised her hand and the guards immediately stopped their advance. Something in the human's tone had gotten her attention. It wasn't pleading or begging like she had expected. It was confident, almost casual, as if he was offering to help her solve a puzzle she couldn't figure out on her own. "What did you say?" she demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. Tay's smile grew just a little wider. "I said, would you like to know who actually stole your energy cores, because I know exactly who did it, when they did it, and why they did it." The room erupted in whispers and murmurs. How could the human know who the real thief was? If he wasn't the one who stole the cores, then who was? And why hadn't he said anything before now? But Tay just stood there calmly, waiting for the queen to make her decision. He had played his first card, and now he needed to see if she was curious enough to let him play the rest of his hand. Queen Lissa stared at him for a long moment, trying to read his expression. Finally she spoke. "You have 1 minute to explain yourself, human, and it better be good." The change in Tay's voice was like watching a sleeping wolf suddenly wake. Gone was the polite, respectful tone of a simple security guard. In its place was something harder, more dangerous and completely confident. The nobles in the room felt it immediately, and many of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I'm not just any security guard," Tay said, and now his words carried the kind of authority that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. "I'm former Earth Special Forces. Do you know what that means?" He didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he began walking slowly around the room, his eyes scanning every face as he spoke. The guards who had been about to execute him now looked uncertain, their weapons lowering slightly as they tried to figure out what was happening. On Earth, Special Forces soldiers are trained to do three things better than anyone else in the galaxy. We observe everything, we analyze what we see, and then we hunt down our targets, no matter how long it takes or how far they run. Tay stopped, walking and faced the Queen directly. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice a theft happening right under my nose?" Queen Lissa felt a chill run down her spine. She had assumed this human was just another simple worker from a primitive planet. But the man standing before her now seemed completely different. His posture was straighter, his eyes were sharper, and something about the way he moved suggested he could be very dangerous if he wanted to be. "For 2 weeks, Tay continued, turning to address the entire court, "I've been tracking your real thief. And let me tell you, whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't some random criminal who got lucky. This was someone with inside information." The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Every noble, advisor, and guard was hanging on Tay's every word, trying to understand what he was saying and what it meant for them. "The thief has intimate knowledge of Alterian security protocols," Tay explained, his voice getting stronger with each word. "They know which cameras can see what, which sensors detect movement, and which alarms will sound if triggered incorrectly. Most importantly, they know exactly when the cores would be most vulnerable to theft." Chief Advisor Nex tried to interrupt. "This is ridiculous. You're just making up stories to save your own life." But Tay ignored him completely and kept talking. "The pattern became clear after I started paying attention. The thief visits the vault every 3rd cycle, always after the evening meal when most of the palace is settling down for the night. They know the guard rotations by heart, because they planned their visits for the exact moments when security would be lightest." Queen Lissa leaned forward on her throne, her anger now replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Explain. Yourself human. How could you know all of this?" Tay smiled again, but this time it wasn't the gentle smile of a security guard. It was the smile of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. "Because I've been watching, Your Majesty. While everyone else was going about their daily business, I was doing what Special Forces soldiers do best. I was gathering intelligence." He began counting off points on his fingers, just like Nex had done earlier, but his facts were much more specific and much more frightening. "The thief always approaches the vault from the east corridor because that's the only route that avoids the motion sensors in the main hallway. They use a special access code that bypasses the standard security lockouts, and most telling of all, they have access to the royal family's private scheduling system, because they always know exactly when the vault will be unguarded." The nobles around the room began looking at each other with suspicion. If what the human was saying was true, then the thief wasn't some outsider who had broken in. It was someone who belonged here, someone they all knew and trusted. "But here's the most important clue," Tay said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the huge room. "The thief has access to the royal family's private codes, not the public ones that servants and guards use, but the special emergency codes that only family members are supposed to know." Queen Lissa's face went pale. The emergency codes were the most closely guarded secrets in the royal family. Only she and her closest relatives knew them, and they were never written down or stored in any computer system. They were passed down, through generations, by word of mouth only. Tay's gaze swept across the silent court one more time, making eye contact with several of the royal family members who were present. Some of them met his stare boldly, others looked away uncomfortably, and one person in particular seemed to be sweating despite the cool air in the chamber. "So the question isn't whether I stole your energy cores, Your Majesty," Tay concluded, his voice now carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "The question is, Who in your own family has been betraying you for the past 2 weeks? Tay reached into his security uniform and pulled out something that made everyone in the room lean forward to get a better look. It was small, about the size of a human thumb, and made of some kind of metal that seemed to shimmer in the light. Most of the aliens had never seen anything like it before, but a few of the more experienced nobles recognized it as human technology. "This little device," Tay said, holding it up so everyone could see, "has been my best friend for the past 2 weeks. While everyone else was sleeping, eating, and going about their normal lives, this was working, recording conversations, storing data, and building a case that would make any Earth detective proud." He paused and looked directly at one person in the crowd. Prince Cole was standing near his aunt's throne, just like he always did during royal gatherings. He was young for an Alterian, probably equivalent to a 25-year-old human, and he had always been considered one of the most handsome and charming members of the royal family. But right now his face was turning a shade of pale green that didn't look healthy at all. "Prince Cole," Tay said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife, "Your Majesty's own nephew has been systematically stealing from the royal vault to pay gambling debts to the Shadow Syndicate." The words hit the court like a bomb going off. The Shadow Syndicate was the most feared criminal organization in this part of the galaxy. They dealt in weapons, drugs, slavery, and worse things that decent people didn't like to think about. The idea that someone from the royal family was involved with them was beyond shocking. It was terrifying. The court erupted in gasps, whispers, and shouts of disbelief. Nobles turned to stare at Prince Cole, who was now sweating visibly despite the cool temperature in the chamber. Some people looked angry, others looked scared, and a few looked like they might be sick. "Lies!" Prince Cole shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "You cannot trust this primitive human. He's obviously making this up to save his own miserable life." But even as he spoke, people could see the guilt written all over his face. His hands were shaking, his voice was too high, and he kept looking around the room like a trapped animal searching for an escape route. Tay remained completely calm in the middle of all this chaos. He waited for the shouting to die down before continuing, his voice steady and confident. "Prince Cole has been selling the energy cores to off-world dealers for the past month," he explained. "Each transaction was carefully planned and executed. He would take 1 or 2 cores at a time, never enough to be noticed immediately, and then sell them to buyers who didn't ask questions about where they came from." Queen Lissa finally found her voice. "This is impossible," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. "How could you know any of this?" Tay smiled and held up the recording device again. Because each transaction was recorded on his personal communicator, Prince Cole foolishly believed that his encryption was beyond human capability to break. But humans have been breaking codes and cracking encryption for centuries. It's one of the things we're actually very good at. He pressed a button on the device, and suddenly Prince Cole's voice filled the entire chamber. The recording was crystal clear, and there was no mistaking who was speaking. "The cores will be delivered to the usual location," Prince Cole's recorded voice said. "But I need payment up front this time. My debts are getting out of control and the syndicate bosses are starting to ask questions." Another voice responded, rougher and more dangerous sounding. "You're playing with fire, little prince. The Shadow Syndicate doesn't like clients who can't manage their own business. Just give me the money," Prince Cole's voice pleaded. "I can get you more cores next week, but I need to pay off what I owe before they decide to make an example of me." The recording continued for several more minutes, with Prince Cole clearly negotiating the sale of royal property to known criminals. He discussed prices, delivery methods, and even mentioned specific details about the palace's security systems that only a family member would know. As the recording played, Queen Lissa's face went through a series of changes that everyone in the room could see. First was shock, pure, complete disbelief that her own nephew could betray her like this. Then came hurt, the pain of realizing that someone she loved and trusted had been lying to her face for weeks. Finally came anger, a rage so intense that several people near the throne actually took steps backward. Prince Cole tried to run. He turned toward the nearest exit and started moving, but the royal guards were already expecting this. They grabbed him before he could take 3 steps, their strong hands clamping down on his arms like iron chains. "Aunt Lissa, please," he begged, all pretense of innocence now gone. "They threatened to kill me. I didn't have a choice." But Queen Lissa was no longer listening to his excuses. She was staring at him with the kind of cold fury that could freeze fire. Her nephew, her own family, had betrayed everything she stood for and put their entire world in danger, and it had taken a human security guard to figure it out. As the royal guards dragged Prince Cole away from the throne, his legs barely able to support his weight, Tay's expression grew even more serious. The recording device was still in his hand, but now he was looking at it like it contained information that could destroy worlds, and in a way it did. The theft itself was just the beginning, Tay said, his voice cutting through Prince Cole's sobs and pleas. "Your Majesty, I'm afraid the situation is much worse than simple robbery." Queen Lissa felt her heart skip a beat. Worse? How could it possibly be worse than discovering that her own nephew had been stealing from her and working with the most dangerous criminals in the galaxy? Tay walked closer to the throne, his movements careful and deliberate. Every person in the room was watching him now, hanging on his every word. Even the guards holding Prince Cole had stopped moving to listen. "Those energy cores that Prince Cole stole," Tay continued, "they weren't just valuable because of their rarity or their power output. They're the key components to your planetary defense grid." The words hit Queen Lissa like a physical blow. Her face went completely white, and for a moment it looked like she might collapse right there on her throne. The planetary defense grid was the most important piece of technology on Alteria. It was what kept their world safe from invasion, protected their people from attack, and maintained their independence in a galaxy full of hostile forces. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tay's expression was grim as he delivered the devastating news. "The Shadow Syndicate now has the capability to disable Alteria's shields. They can study those cores, reverse engineer the technology, and figure out exactly how to shut down your defenses from the outside." The court erupted in panic. Nobles were shouting questions, guards were reaching for their weapons, and several people looked like they were about to faint. The idea that their world's protective shields could be compromised was the stuff of nightmares. "Your nephew didn't just steal treasure," Tay continued, his voice somehow carrying over all the chaos. "He sold out your entire world's defenses to the worst criminals in the galaxy." Prince Cole, who had been struggling weakly against the guards holding him, suddenly went completely limp. The full weight of what he had done was finally hitting him, and it was more than his mind could handle. "They said they'd kill me if I didn't pay," he screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "The gambling bosses, they showed me pictures of what they do to people who don't pay their debts. I've seen the bodies, Aunt Lissa. I've seen what they—" Joe. Tears were streaming down his face now, and his whole body was shaking like a leaf in a storm. "I didn't know what the cores were really for. They just said they were valuable, that they needed them for some kind of research project. I swear. I didn't know they were part of the defense grid," but his protest sounded hollow even to himself. Everyone in the royal family knew what the energy cores were for. They had been taught about the planetary defense system since childhood. It was one of the most basic facts about their world's security. Queen Lissa stared at her nephew with a mixture of disgust and heartbreak. This was the boy she had helped raise after his parents died in a transport accident. She had treated him like her own son, given him everything he could ever want, and trusted him with the most important secrets of their kingdom, and he had betrayed it all for gambling money. "How long do we have?" she asked Tay, her voice hollow and defeated. Tay consulted some kind of device on his wrist that looked like a cross between a watch and a computer. Based on the timeline from the recordings, the Syndicate has had those cores for at least 3 days. If they're working with competent engineers, they could have the defensive grid mapped out within a week. The Queen felt like the floor was falling out from under her. A week to prepare for the worst possible scenario, an attack on their homeworld by an enemy who knew exactly how to get through their defenses. She looked at Tay, the human she had been about to execute just minutes ago. He had uncovered the truth when her own people had failed. He had seen through the deception that had fooled everyone else in the palace, and now he was the only one who seemed to understand the full scope of the disaster they were facing. "What do we do?" she asked, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. The proud Queen of Alteria was asking a human security guard for advice on how to save her world. Tay was quiet for a moment, thinking through the options. Around them, the court waited, in terrified silence for his answer. Even Prince Cole had stopped crying to listen. "First," Tay said finally, "we need to figure out exactly what information the Syndicate has and how much damage has already been done. Then we need to find those cores and get them back before they can finish their analysis." He paused and looked directly at the Queen. "But most importantly, Your Majesty, you're going to need help, the kind of help that only humans can provide." Queen Lissa stared at him, realizing that the man she had condemned to death might be the only person in the galaxy who could save her world. Tay pulled out a small scanner from his belt, the kind of device that most aliens had never seen before, but that every human soldier carried as standard equipment. The screen was glowing with data that was streaming in from sources across the galaxy: communications intercepts, ship movement reports, and intelligence gathered by human networks that the Alterians didn't even know existed. "The Syndicate fleet is already mobilizing," Tay said, his voice calm despite the terrible news he was delivering. His fingers moved across the scanner's surface, pulling up different screens of information. "According to my sources, they've been gathering ships and mercenaries for the past week." Queen Lissa felt like she was drowning. Every word Tay spoke made the situation sound worse and more hopeless. "How many ships?" she managed to ask. "At least 50 combat vessels, maybe more," Tay replied, not sugarcoating the reality. "They're not taking any chances. This isn't just a raid or a quick strike. They're planning a full invasion." The numbers hit the court like a series of hammer blows. Alteria's own defense fleet consisted of maybe 20 ships, and most of those were designed for patrol duty rather than serious combat. Against 50 Syndicate warships, they wouldn't stand a chance even with their planetary shields working properly. "You have maybe 48 hours before they arrive to claim their prize," Tay continued, consulting the data flowing across his scanner. "Maybe less if they decide to move faster than expected." Queen Lissa felt her world crumbling around her. Everything she had worked for, everything her ancestors had built, everything her people depended on for their safety and freedom, it was all falling apart because of one weak, selfish young man who couldn't control his gambling addiction. Her nephew's betrayal had left Alteria defenseless against one of the galaxy's most ruthless criminal organizations. The Shadow Syndicate didn't just conquer worlds. They enslaved populations, stripped planets of their resources, and left nothing but death and suffering in their wake. She thought about her people going about their daily lives down on the planet's surface, families having dinner together, children playing in parks, workers heading home after long days at their jobs. None of them knew that in 2 days, their entire world might be under the control of criminals who saw them as nothing more than property to be bought and sold. The weight of responsibility was crushing. As Queen, it was her job to protect her people, and she had failed them in the worst possible way. She had trusted the wrong person, ignored the warning signs, and now millions of innocent lives were in danger. She looked across the room at Tay, the human she had been ready to execute just minutes ago. He was standing there calmly, his scanner still in his hands, waiting to see what she would do next. This man had uncovered a conspiracy that her own intelligence services had missed completely. He had identified the real thief when everyone else was ready to blame him. And now he seemed to be the only person in the room who understood exactly how bad things really were. "Kim Tay," she said, her voice breaking slightly as she spoke his name, "I have wronged you gravely. I nearly had you killed for a crime you didn't commit. I let my prejudices and the opinions of others cloud my judgment." Tay watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. He didn't interrupt or try to make her feel better with polite words. He just waited and listened. "But if there's any chance to save my people," the Queen continued, her voice getting stronger as she found her resolve, "if there's anything that can be done to stop this disaster, then I'm willing to do whatever it takes." "You want my help?" Tay asked quietly. There was no mockery in his voice, no satisfaction at seeing the mighty Queen brought low. Just a simple question that carried enormous weight. What happened next shocked everyone in the royal chamber so completely that several people actually gasped out loud. Queen Lissa, the proud ruler of Alteria who had never bowed to anyone in her entire life, slowly got down from her throne and knelt on the crystal floor in front of the human guard. The sight was almost impossible to believe. This was a woman who had commanded armies, negotiated with the most powerful leaders in the galaxy, and never shown weakness or uncertainty in public. Foreign ambassadors had traveled across space just for the privilege of being allowed to bow to her. And now she was on her knees in front of a man she had condemned to death. "I'm begging you," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent chamber. "Please help us recover the cause before it's too late. Help me save my people." The court watched in stunned silence as their sovereign humbled herself before the man she had wronged. Nobles who had spent their entire lives following royal protocol didn't know how to react to what they were seeing. Some looked ashamed, others looked frightened, and a few looked like they finally understood just how serious the situation really was. Tay looked down at the kneeling queen for a long moment, his face showing the weight of the decision he was being asked to make. The fate of an entire world was resting in his hands. Tay stood perfectly still, looking down at the most powerful woman in Alterian space kneeling at his feet. The silence in the royal chamber was so complete that you could hear the soft hum of the ship's engines in the background. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what the human would do. This was a moment that would change everything, and Tay knew it. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. What he said next wouldn't just determine whether Queen Lissa got his help. It would shape the relationship between humans and Alterians for generations to come. The queen stayed on her knees, not moving, not speaking, just waiting for his answer. Her royal advisors looked uncomfortable watching their sovereign in such a humble position, but none of them dared to speak. Prince Cole, still held by the guards, had stopped crying and was staring at the scene with wide, frightened eyes. "I'll help you," Tay said finally, his words cutting through the silence like a knife through silk. "But not as your guard or your subject, as an equal." The simple statement sent shockwaves through the court. No one had ever spoken to Queen Lissa as an equal before. Even other planetary rulers showed her respect and deference when they met. The idea that a human, a member of what they considered a primitive species, would demand to be treated as her equal was almost unthinkable. But Tay wasn't finished. He extended his hand toward the kneeling queen, offering to help her stand. It was a gesture that showed both respect and authority at the same time. "I have conditions," he continued, his voice steady and confident. "If you want my help, if you want me to save your world, then things are going to change around here." Queen Lissa looked at his outstretched hand for a moment, then slowly reached up to take it. His grip was firm but not rough, strong but not dominating. As he helped her back to her feet, she could feel that this was no longer the same man who had walked her halls as a simple security guard. "First," Tay said, still holding her hand as she stood, "I want full pardons for all humans currently imprisoned in Alterian space. Every human who's been arrested for crimes they didn't commit, everyone who's been locked up because of prejudice and false accusations, they all go free." The court began to murmur with surprise and concern. There were probably hundreds of humans in Alterian prisons, and many of the nobles had profited from the cheap labor those prisoners provided. "Second," Tay continued, "I want equal rights and representation in your government. No more second-class citizenship for humans. We get the same opportunities, the same protections under the law, and the same voice in how things are run." Chief-Eye. Advisor next tried to object. "Your Majesty, this is outrageous. You cannot seriously consider—" But Queen Lissa silenced him with a single look. She was staring into Tay's eyes, seeing something there that she had never noticed before. This wasn't just a man asking for favors. This was a leader negotiating the future of his people. "And third," Tay said, his voice getting stronger with each demand, "I want an end to the discriminatory laws that treat my people as second-class beings. No more restrictions on where humans can live, what jobs they can hold, or who they can marry. No more assuming we're criminals just because of where we come from." The demands hung in the air like thunder after lightning. What Tay was asking for would completely change Alterian society. It would mean admitting that they had been wrong about humans for decades. It would mean giving up the comfortable prejudices that had made them feel superior to other species. Queen Lissa looked around at her court, seeing the shock and resistance on many faces. Then she looked back at Tay, the man who held the key to saving her world. "Done," she said without hesitation. "All of it." The word exploded through the chamber like a bomb. Several nobles gasped out loud, others looked angry, and a few seemed to be in complete shock. But Queen Lissa's voice was firm and final. "Done," she repeated, louder this time so everyone could hear. "Full pardons, equal rights, equal representation, and an end to discriminatory laws. You have my word as Queen of Alteria." Tay smiled and finally released her hand. "Then we have work to do." He turned to address the entire court, his voice carrying the authority of someone who was no longer asking for permission but giving orders. "Hunting the Shadow Syndicate requires skills your people don't possess," he announced. "We're going to do things differently than you're used to. We'll use human tactics, human technology, and human ways of thinking. You'll need to trust our methods even when they seem unconventional." Some of the nobles looked worried about what unconventional might mean, but Queen Lissa nodded her agreement. "Whatever it takes," she said. "My people's lives are more important than our pride." Tay's smile grew wider. "Good, because we're about to show this galaxy what humans can really do when we're fighting for something that matters." Within 3 hours of Queen Lissa's agreement, something amazing was happening aboard the Alterian royal vessel. Humans who had been working as janitors, maintenance workers, and low-level technicians were suddenly being called to the bridge and given important jobs. Word had spread quickly through the ship's human community that one of their own had not only saved himself from execution, but had also negotiated equal rights for all of them. Tay stood in the ship's war room, surrounded by maps, computer screens, and communication equipment. But he wasn't working alone. Next to him stood Captain Park Mia, a human woman who had been serving as a shuttle pilot, but who was actually a former Earth Navy officer with 15 years of combat experience. On his other side was engineer Lee Jun, who everyone thought was just a repair technician, but who had actually designed some of the most advanced tracking systems in human space. "The trail starts here," Tay said, pointing to a spot on the star map where Prince Cole's personal shuttle had last been detected. "He left the royal vessel 12 hours ago, right after he realized we were closing in on him." The Alterian officers in the room were still getting used to taking orders from humans, but they were trying their best to adapt. Commander Zex, the ship's security chief, leaned forward to study the map. "He could be anywhere in the galaxy by now," Zex said, his voice full of doubt. "How can we possibly track one small shuttle through all of that empty space?" Tay smiled, the same confident expression he had worn when confronting the Queen. "That's where human tracking techniques come in. Your people think like Alterians. Logical, predictable, following established patterns. But humans think differently." He began typing commands into the computer, and suddenly the star map came alive with new information. Lines appeared showing shipping routes, communication relays, and fuel stations. Red dots marked known syndicate hideouts and safe houses. "Prince Cole is scared, desperate, and running for his life," Tay explained. "But he's also lazy, spoiled, and used to luxury. He won't take the hard routes or the dangerous shortcuts. He'll stick to the main travel corridors where he can find comfortable accommodations and safe refueling stops." Captain Mia joined the conversation, her fingers dancing. "Across another computer console. Plus, he's still in contact with his syndicate handlers. Every time he sends a message or receives new instructions, he creates an electronic signature that we can follow." The Alterian officers watched in amazement as the humans worked with their technology in ways they had never seen before. Earth. Computers were different from Alterian systems, faster, more flexible, and designed to handle the kind of creative problem-solving that humans excelled at. "Got him," Lee Jun announced from his station. "His shuttle stopped for fuel at the Nexus station 6 hours ago. The fuel depot manager remembers him because he paid with royal credits and complained about the quality of their food." Tay nodded, with satisfaction. "See? Predictable. What's the next logical stop along that route?" Mia studied the star map and pointed to a system about 2 days' travel away. The Karen system. It's got luxury resorts, high-end gambling establishments, and it's right on the edge of syndicate territory. Perfect place for a scared prince to hide while waiting for his criminal friends to pick him up. Then that's where we're going, Tay decided. But we're not taking the direct route. We're going to use an old human strategy called cutting off the escape routes. The next few hours were like nothing the Alterian crew had ever experienced. Instead of following Prince Cole directly, the human team had them jumping through hyperspace to 3 different star systems, setting up surveillance networks and blocking potential escape routes. They were hunting like a pack of wolves, surrounding their prey before moving in for the kill. Humans don't give up, Tay explained to his Alterian partners as they pursued the fleeing prince through an asteroid field that most pilots would have considered impossible to navigate. Back on Earth, our ancestors were persistence hunters. We didn't catch our prey by being faster or stronger. We caught them by never stopping, never giving up, and chasing them until they collapsed from exhaustion. Captain Mia was piloting their ship through the asteroid field like it was an empty highway, making turns and maneuvers that should have been impossible for a vessel of their size. The Alterian crew members were gripping their seats and trying not to look out the windows as massive rocks whizzed past them at incredible speeds. The Syndicate expects alien tactics, Mia said with a grin, spinning the ship sideways to slip through a gap between 2 asteroids that was barely wider than their hull. They're prepared for logical by-the-book approaches. They're not prepared for human unpredictability. She was right. When they finally caught up to Prince Cole's shuttle, it was trying to hide behind a small moon in a system that wasn't on any official star charts. The Syndicate had thought they were safe there, but human tracking methods had found them anyway. There, Li Jun said, pointing to his scanner. 1 small shuttle and, oh my, 3 Syndicate cruisers. They're already here to pick him up. Through the ship's view screen, they could see a hidden base built into the moon's surface. It was heavily armed and obviously designed to be a secret meeting point for criminal activities. Prince Cole's shuttle was docked at the main platform, and the stolen energy cores were probably already being transferred to the Syndicate ships. Perfect, Tay said, studying the enemy position. We've got them exactly where we want them. The Alterian officers looked at him like he was crazy. Where we want them? They outnumber us 3-1 and they're in a fortified position. But Tay was smiling again, the expression that had become familiar to everyone who worked with him. That's the beauty of human tactics. We don't fight fair, we fight smart. The plan that Tay came up with was so crazy that the Alterian officers thought he had lost his mind. Instead of attacking the Syndicate base head-on, he wanted to use a combination of deception, misdirection, and what he called controlled chaos to achieve their goals. We're not here to start a war, Tay explained as the team prepared for the mission. We're here to get the energy cores back and capture as many Syndicate leaders as possible. The best way to do that is to make them think they're winning right up until the moment they realize they've already lost. Captain Mia had disguised their ship to look like a damaged merchant vessel, complete with fake emergency signals and distress calls. Engineer Li Jun had rigged their weapon systems to appear offline while actually being more dangerous than ever. And Tay himself had put on the uniform of a Syndicate officer, using information from Prince Cole's recordings to perfect his disguise. The first part of the plan worked perfectly. When their damaged ship limped into the hidden base, the Syndicate guards thought they were dealing with easy prey. They brought the ship into their docking bay and prepared to board it, expecting to find valuable cargo and maybe some prisoners they could sell. Instead, they found a team of humans who had been planning this raid for hours and knew exactly what to do. The battle was over in less than 10 minutes. The Syndicate criminals were used to fighting other aliens who followed predictable patterns and stuck to established rules of combat. They had no idea how to deal with humans who seemed to be everywhere at once, using tactics that made no logical sense, but somehow worked perfectly. Tay found Prince Cole hiding in a storage room, surrounded by the stolen energy cores and looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The young prince was so scared he could barely speak, but he cooperated completely when Tay explained that his cooperation might be the only thing that could save his life. The cores are all here, Tay reported to Queen Lissa over the communication link. Prince Cole is alive and in custody, and we've captured 3 high-ranking Syndicate officers who should have lots of interesting information to share. But the real victory came when Li Jun managed to hack into the Syndicate's computer systems and download their entire invasion plan. Ships, troop movements, target lists, communication codes, everything the criminals had been planning was now in human hands. The invasion fleet is still out there, Tay warned, but without the energy cores they can't disable your planetary shields. And without their leaders to give orders, they're going to be confused and disorganized. This might be the perfect time to launch a counterattack. The journey back to Alteria felt completely different from the desperate chase that had brought them to the Syndicate base. Instead of hunting criminals, they were returning home as heroes. The energy cores were safely secured in the ship's vault. The captured Syndicate officers were locked in the brig, and Prince Cole was under guard in a detention cell where he couldn't cause any more trouble. When they arrived at Alteria, Queen Lisa was waiting for them with what looked like half the planet's population watching on screens around the world. The news of the successful mission had spread quickly, and everyone wanted to see the humans who had saved their world. "My people," Queen Lisa began, her voice carrying to billions of listeners across Alterian space. "Today we learned an important lesson about strength, courage, and the danger of prejudice." She was standing on the main platform of the Royal Spaceport, with Tay and his team beside her, but instead of treating them like subordinates or hired help, she was presenting them as equals and partners. "The humans we once dismissed as primitive and untrustworthy have proven themselves to be our equals and our allies," the Queen continued. "They saw the truth when we were blinded by our own assumptions. They solved problems that our best minds could not crack. And they risked their lives to save a world that had treated them unfairly." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word. Many of them had never seen humans treated with respect before, and some were clearly struggling to understand this new reality. Queen Lissa turned to face Tay directly, and her next words would be remembered for generations. "Kim Tay of Earth," she announced in a voice that carried across the galaxy, "I name you Ambassador of Human Relations, with full authority to speak for your people in our space." It was an incredible honor, and everyone watching understood the significance. Ambassadors were usually chosen from the highest levels of alien nobility. The fact that a human, and a former security guard at that, was being given such an important position was revolutionary. Tay stepped forward and bowed respectfully, but not subserviently. When he spoke, his voice was calm and confident, carrying the authority of someone who had earned his position through courage and competence. "Your Majesty," he said, "this is just the beginning. Humanity has much to offer the galaxy, if you're willing to listen." He looked out at the crowd of Alterians who were watching this historic moment. "We're not asking for special treatment or charity. We're asking for the chance to prove that cooperation is stronger than prejudice, that unity is more powerful than division, and that different species working together can accomplish things that none of us could achieve alone." The applause that followed was unlike anything anyone had ever heard at a royal ceremony. It wasn't the polite, respectful clapping that usually greeted royal announcements. It was the sound of genuine excitement and hope for a better future. As Tay stood there next to Queen Lissa's throne, no longer as a guard but as an honored advisor and the official representative of his people, he knew that everything had changed. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for too long. They wouldn't make that mistake again.